Well, hello and good evening, and welcome to the Curator's Talk on the British Museum exhibition, Legion, Life in the Roman Army. I'm Richard Abdy, the lead curator of the show. By way of introduction, I should say I'm not exactly a specialist in the Roman army. I'm the Roman coins curator at the museum. But I grew up on the frontier of civilization, Glasgow, or at least it was, in the 2nd century when the Antonine Wall passed through it. Attending Glasgow University, I was lucky enough to study Roman frontier systems and develop a fascination with the long-lost life on the edge of a vast empire. Roman frontier life was mostly military, of course. This evocative relief you can see here is from just outside Glasgow, a place called Croy Hill on the wall. You see 3 legionaries, recognisable by their long rectangular shields and armour-piercing javelins, the accoutrements of heavy infantrymen. We don't know much about it since the inscription's gone, but it's been interpreted as a father with his soldier sons flanking him. If so, it's redolent of the Roman army as an engine of social change, spreading and reinforcing Romanitas down the generations, as much as a mighty war machine. Now, my remit for the show was to look as much as possible at the lives of ordinary people, and a very good place to start is Roman soldiers' letters home. Amazingly, some do survive. The most extensive one is of a chap called Claudius Trentianus, 2nd century AD Egypt. Bunch of letters, amongst which, or associated with which, is a letter of introduction describing him as a veteran in AD 136. Nice date. So this means he must have joined up round about AD 110, round about the time that Trajan's Column was being built, the foremost monument to Roman military might in the centre of Rome. Amongst his letters, we hear that his joining up was a torturous process. He tries to join the legions, but his letter of recommendation isn't good enough. So on the rebound, he joins the Roman auxiliary service, the Marines, in fact. We hear he's about to be dispatched to the front, the Eastern Front. This is probably AD 113 with Trajan's campaign against the Parthians. But it's debatable whether he went. He might not have gone, because the next letter he seems to be back as back in Alexandria, and this time a legionary. So he's made it. And the first thing he wants with his increased salary is a concubine. So he turns out to be not quite such a nice chap. A little bit later on, he's pitched into the revolt, the Jewish diaspora revolt, which spreads from Cyrenaica to Alexandria. And then we have a big long gap where we don't know much about what goes on. But it's quite a nice set of letters which gives a really good impression of opinions and experiences of an ordinary Roman soldier. Now, Roman military history spans a millennium. It's a vast topic, but focusing on Trentianus gives us focus and helps draw out aspects of material culture from his life story. So Trentianus's world begins, if I can click that on, yes. Begins with the conquest of Egypt, of course, 30 BC under the first emperor, Augustus, or Octavian as he was at that particular point. Augustus liberated Cleopatra's treasury, for want of a better word, which made him vastly wealthy, of course. Famously, he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Interest rates, we hear at Rome, dropped from 12% down to 4%. This float of money he used to make a permanent fighting force of about 300,000 soldiers based around the frontier, and to allow the career soldier to develop. initially serving a term of 16 years before retirement, and this later became 25 years for legionaries. Citizens like Claudius Trentianus, at the end of their service, got a lump sum, a pension worth about 10 years' salary. By the mid-1st century, non-citizen soldiers received not a lump of money, but something the Romans considered very valuable indeed: enfranchisement, the chance to become a Roman citizen. This could be passed on to heirs and was, of course, a transformative process. And this lasted up to the time of Caracalla, who in AD 212 issued an edict making all subjects of the empire who were free, not enslaved, citizens. So it ended that transformative process. In between these 2 centuries, we have the Roman soldier, especially the legionary, that's familiar to us in your sword and sandals epics, your biblical epics on stage and screen. Now, as Augustus conceived it, only citizens would be eligible for the elite legions. There was about 30 of them throughout the empire, 150,000 men, if you like. Augustus intended the same again to be auxiliary support services. Marines, as mentioned, cavalry and the like. These are most commonly light infantrymen, and on the right you can see a tombstone of an auxiliaryman called Firmus. He is holding simple thrusting spears in one hand and a flat oval shield in the other. Whereas on the left we have Petilius, the legionary. He's holding a armor-piercing javelin called a pilum, and he would also be holding a long rectangular shield, which he doesn't have on the tombstone, but we'll show you one later. Auxiliarymen were probably paid about 4/5 of the salary of a legionary, but you'll notice Firmus's very magnificent tombstone. Possibly the reason here is that he died age 36, so he could have served possibly a couple of decades before he died, earning a salary, whereas Petilius was only in service for 5 years before he met his untimely death. And this reminds us that sometimes you could join even at the age of 13. Some tombstones, because they have the length of military service and the age, you can extrapolate that they joined at the age of 13. To the Romans, the main entry requirement, apart from letters of recommendation, was height. You had to be 5'10". That's 5'10" Roman, which is about 172 centimeters in modern terms. A Roman foot is slightly shorter. When Trentianus joins up initially and fails to get into the legions, he bewails, "Here nothing but money and letters of recommendation can help a man unless he helps himself." On the top right we have the Sacramentum, another fragment of Trentianus's letter. Tells us that he was ordered to take the oath. This is the point of no return, where even a Roman citizen must give up his rights to be subjected to corporal and capital punishment without trial. In terms of joining up, though, we actually have another soldier, a chap called, if I can move it on, a chap called Appian. Again, 2nd century AD, Egyptian soldier, letters surviving on papyri. And he is someone that intends to join the Marines from the beginning. He's a non-citizen, but he's sent a little bit further away. He's sent to the Bay of Naples. So rather than Trentianus Alexandria, Appian's journey to join up involves a long sea crossing, which he decries as being terrible. He tells us about his first pay packet, 3 gold coins received from Caesar. He gives an impression of ethnic clubbing. the Marines on the Bay of Naples, one of the main groups of people were Egyptians, but there could be Thracians and other ethnicities there. And he sends back greetings to, in his first letter to his father, of Egyptians that have also moved into that regiment. He changes his name. He's no longer the Greek-sounding Appian. He becomes Antonius Maximus, the Roman-sounding name, and he also meets a local woman called Aufidia. He marries, he says, unofficial marriage for a soldier at that rank, and he starts a family. He has a young boy called Maximus Jr. Interestingly, he sends a portrait home, he says. Now, we can never know what that looks like, but in the exhibition, we can give you a very nice impression of military families from the 2nd century AD in Egypt through the medium of the mummy portrait. These are beautiful, very vivid portraits of people in wax encaustic. They look almost like oil paintings. And on the left, we have a portrait of a soldier. You can see his sword pommel just visible at the corner, and that's an Eton museum. And he's often paired with the British Museum's jewellery lady from the same graveyard, but we're not entirely sure if they are a pair or siblings or a couple, but people often suggest that they are by the same hand. Now, the sacramentum, the military oath, comes at some point in the midst of initial training. This took two forms, campus and palus. Campus involved field exercises, a big route march at least once a month. Trentianus complains that he needs to go through 2 pairs of shoes a month. He initially has the wrong sort of footwear. He says shoes with buttons are useless. He forgets things like trousers, so he's sends home for that. So he's obviously in chilly climes as well, and living rough. Palus, well, that's training against usually a wooden post, usually with heavier wooden weapons in order to strengthen the muscles. We have in the exhibition, we don't have a post, but we have something that looks a bit more substantial, potentially a wooden anthropomorphic target, lots of chop marks on the front from Carlisle on Hadrian's Wall. And even more evocative, I think, is one of many ox skulls from Vindolanda, full of catapult bolts holes. And a coin there showing potentially weapons training with blunt weapons. Now, both Trentianus and Appian were ambitious soldiers in their own ways. Trentianus wanted to transfer to a different regiment at the beginning. He says when he's a Marine, he absolutely hates it. He's bullied by his officers. He gets his equipment nicked by his own officers. He rails that even if he could join a land-based auxiliary cohort, it would be better in lieu of a legion. However, Appian gives a little bit more insight. Being a non-citizen, he had fewer options to join different regiments, but he knew he was in with a chance for promotion up the ranks because he could read and write. So, as you can see there, he actually intimates that with his father. You educated me well, and I hope thereby to have quick advancement if the gods so will it. And this reminds us that literacy in pre-modern times would have been very low indeed. So it's remarkable that we have the writings of ordinary people like this. Now, Trentianus was quite clear. He thought Marines were at the bottom of the heap. They certainly had little dangerous sailing to do, but they were kind of dog's bodies of the army, if you like. They were certainly road builders. They also looked after what the Roman poet Juvenal described as the mainstays of Roman civilization, bread and circuses. And this would be to look after the grain fleets, the point of departure of the Egyptian grain fleet from Alexandria, of course, where Trentianus was based, and where Appian was based in the Bay of Naples was the arrival point. So that's the bread, the grain. But surprisingly, circuses, well, We have here a coin on the bottom left from the early 3rd century showing the Colosseum in use, and it's surrounded at the top by a forest of masts. And from these would be slung the awnings, great horizontal sail-like objects, and who better to unfurl these out than the Marines? So that was one of their more unusual tasks. But perhaps the most famous activity of the Marines occurred a couple of generations before Appian arrived in Italy, and that was the fire rescue, I suppose you could call it, with the eruption of Vesuvius in AD 79. And the burial of the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. From the latter, on the beachfront, was uncovered a mass of skeletons in the 1980s. Previously, they thought most of the citizens had escaped, but uncovered a very grisly find of at least 300 bodies, and amongst them was the amazing find of a soldier with all his kit bowled flat by the pyroclastic flow on the beach. He has a sword, dagger, 2 belts that held them with very flashy metal plates at the front, a purse with 87 denarii worth of coins in gold and silver, and that would be a good portion of a auxiliaryman's wages at the time. A salary would have been about 187 denarii. By the time of Trentianus and Appian, that pay had risen to 250 denarii for an auxiliaryman. And the belts can be compared very favourably with the sculptural representations in the exhibition. Now, the commoner's dream promotion would be to that of centurion, commander of 80 men. That's 10 times 8 men units that we call contubernium, tent mates, tent shearers. It was a highly valued job in the Roman army. Pay would start with the junior centurion, and we have on the left a colorized image of the junior centurion Facilis at Colchester, young centurion. He'd be on 15 times an ordinary soldier's pay, and that could move up to 30 times from a late career centurion. We have Caelius from the Rhine frontier on the right, beautifully colored with all his decorations. And even the most senior centurion in the legion would be on 60 times a legionary's pay. And just to remind you that Caelius is swathed in military decorations, medals, harness and medals, and things like bracelets. And we can show you very similar adjustable award bracelets from Colchester. It was a long lifetime career, perhaps 50 years. There's a particular centurion that you can follow in the book, whose monument erected by his wife, because centurions and upwards could marry officially, erected by his wife, describing 50 years of postings across the empire. So twice as long as an ordinary soldier might serve. So, interestingly, that particular centurion's career started at the bottom. He became eventually a standard bearer, which is a double pay position, before impressing the legion enough to be voted by the legion to become a centurion. So you had to lead from the front if you were a standard bearer. You needed to be brave. You also had to be literate, like all promoted men. Plus, you also had to be numerate, because you were the payroll clerk of your unit. The Eagle Standard of the legions is the most famous. We have on the right here an auxiliary century standard bearer with his typical lion skin or bear skin hood. And on the left, a more unusual form of standard bearer, Imaginifer, holding the emperor's bust on a stick. And we have in the exhibition some surviving regalia, which is interesting. We can show alongside. And the centurion's other form of signaller, the trumpeter. And we have a beautiful cornu, or long curly G-shaped trumpet from Pompeii in the show. Now, Trentianus wanted to be a legionary, but later in the show we can show kind of second stage, another letter entirely unrelated of the father whose son is a legionary, but he tells us he doesn't want to be a legionary, he's unhappy, and instead he wants to be a cavalryman. Now, most cavalrymen were auxiliarymen, but they got extra money in order to own a horse and equip it with its finery, maybe an enslaved groom to help maintain it too. So even an auxiliary cavalryman could get slightly more pay than a legionary. And of course, you look very dashing. Owning a horse, using a horse was prestigious. Officers from the rank of centurion upwards rode while their men marched in infantry regiments. And of course, you could show off your finery and skills through parades and maneuvers, particularly what we call cavalry sports, where riders would be masked with helmets that denoted sort of Homeric combatants. And, I think we've lost the sound on that one. They could carry flamboyant standards like the Draco standard, which is, we have a unique surviving Draco standard from Koblenz on the Rhine, Koblenz Castle. That was a form of a sort of windsock-like standard that was taken from the Sarmatians. The helmets, famously Ribchester in the middle, could be Team Greek perhaps. We have another helmet in the British Museum at the top of an Amazon, which sounds very gender bending, but on the Greek and Roman stage, male actors played both male and female roles, so it wouldn't have been unusual in Roman times. And at the bottom, the beautifully preserved Crosby helmet, representing perhaps Team Trojan with his distinctive Phrygian cap. Now, the next section is arms and armour, if you like. Dressing for battle, I've called it. And you'd expect that in an exhibition on the Roman army. There's three ways to acquire kit if you're a Roman soldier. As you can see from the quote of Trentianus at the top, Trentianus was always scrounging, certainly while he was a marine, asking for spears, battle sword, even grappling irons. Once he became a legionary, perhaps better pay helped him to buy his own, and that was one of the main ways of doing it. You always had to pay for your equipment somehow, so you would look after it. This could be direct from the armourer, or there was a strong second-hand market. A lot of equipment, helmets might have not just one owner engraved on it, but the graffito of 2 owners, 3 owners, even 4 on one particular specimen. Now, particularly proud of the assemblage on the left here, which shows the legionary at his most protected by the end of the 2nd century. Helmets evolved over time to have greater spread neck protection. And this is a beautiful helmet. You can see more of it on the right from Niedermormter. It's in Bonn Museum, still gleaming with its amazing bronze. And it belonged to a soldier of the 30th Legion. And that's paired together with the characteristic segmental cuirass or body armour, and even a sword arm guard, a manica or armoured sleeve. Both of these are from the National Museum of Scotland, very gratefully loaned in to us. Perhaps the most characteristic item of a legionary was the distinctive long shield or scutum. You can see this image from a section of Trajan's column where these almost like roof tile shaped shields can be used to create the tank-like formation that's called the tortoise. And in the exhibition, we are so lucky to have a beautifully preserved, uniquely preserved scutum from the city of Dura Europos on the Euphrates, which is now in Yale Museum and Art Gallery. It's survived. It's a bit more curled up than it would have been in life, but it's old, so we can forgive it that, I think. Made of plywood, leather, and paint. It looks like it was never actually used because it doesn't have its metal boss in the middle. There's no nail holes to fix it on, so it looks like it was completely a spare part. After being equipped, tooled up, every soldier will know he has to face battle one day. Trentianus's moment of deployment came probably in AD 113, while still a Marine. Know that I'm being sent out to Syria and I'm about to leave with a detachment of Exulum. That's a bit of a regiment that marches under a banner. And we have a nice banner from Corbridge there. And we have a section of Trajan's column showing the sort of thing that Marines did. They went out first to clear a pathway for the advancing army. There's more marching than fighting on Trajan's column, interestingly. So in addition to hard labour, Trentianus would have had to have months, perhaps, of enduring life under the skins, as the Romans called it. And the typical Roman tent was apparently made of goat skin and would be shared by 8 men, an 8-man tent party. You can see a reconstruction there, but in the exhibition we have some surviving tent panels, square tent panels from Vindolanda. Camps had to be created each evening after a full day's march. Now, pitching together, emperors could gain military credibility with their men. A good example is Septimius Severus on the left there. But surprisingly, even empresses could gain such military credibility by sharing in this rough life. Of particular note was Severus's empress Julia Domna, who gained the title Matri Castrorum. You can see on the gold coin below there, mother of the army camps, base mom, if you like. And you see her there with a very elaborate hairpiece, but it is a wig. You can just about see natural hair peeping out on the cheekbones. And furthermore, it's a very helmety shaped wig. Now, one of the things we know is that emperors were recommended by their doctors to have a campaign crop. So perhaps Julia is showing her campaign credibility by telling us that she's actually wearing a wig, being candid about it. And there's plenty of knit combs from Vindolanda that attest to the sort of infestation you could get with close quarter living. So, weeks of trudging. I can move it on. Yes. Weeks of trudging and manoeuvring had the objective of bringing the army to set-piece battle. This was the Roman speciality, bringing your highly structured army against the onslaught of the foe. There's a very good description of how this is done by the 2nd century Roman writer Arrian, Flavius Arrianus. And he writes of a battle that he fought as governor of Cappadocia in AD 135 against the Sarmatians. Now, the Sarmatians were heavily armoured. Their speciality was heavily armoured cavalry, almost like medieval knights, completely armoured of horse and armoured of men, and these were known as cataphracts. And there's a little description there. Interesting to note that you'd have 3 lines of legionaries formed up. The ones at the front would be the youngest, who were presumably blocked by the older men and hadn't quite experienced the full horror of battle yet. Rather cruel situation. So, a beautiful picture, painting by the scholar-artist Peter Connolly there, shows the battle in full flight. Arrian was very careful to pick his grounds, flanked by high ground either side so the horsemen couldn't outflank the soldiers. And he relates, he's writing to the Emperor Hadrian at the time, his lines are 10 deep, 8 lines of legionaries hurling javelins. In fact, as they get further back in the lines, they hurl lighter forms of javelins. Behind them we have, if I just click that on, yes, there we are, beautiful relief from Lyon showing the shield formation of legionaries. Behind those 8 lines of legionaries we have archers, and there's the famous Housestead's archer in the exhibition. Behind the archers we have a line of mounted archers, greater elevation, can shoot over their heads. And behind them, Arrian placed artillery with catapults, the larger ones able to fire up to about half a kilometre. These were all released at once as the enemy was about to engage, and Arrian won the day. So here we are, hopefully, try clicking again. Yes, you can see cataphracts put to flight on Trajan's column, and to represent our cataphracts is another beautiful treasure from Yale Art Gallery, complete and very serviceable cataphract armour. When it was discovered again at the city of Dura Europus in the 1930s, it was so well preserved that the local Bedouin stuck it on a horse and rode around on it. So, once battle's won, just to stick with Trajan's column, there's a very good section of Trajan's column that shows the whole imperial project. It runs from right to left, and here's a colorized version down below. We have the battle in full swing on the right. Behind them we have artillery. In fact, you can see that they're cart-mounted artillery, a bit like modern pickup trucks with heavy machine guns on, if you like. Behind them we have the emperor and his signallers, trumpeters and standard bearers, and behind them we have a very Roman innovation, an army field hospital, mobile army field hospital, where capsarii, bandage men, are patching up the troops as they are coming wounded. But finally, after the battle's won, they move on. We have consolidation, and on the left we have forts being built on the conquered land, and on the far left we have, more grimly, the civilians surrendering themselves, men, women and children. And those surrendering folk could well become human booty alongside inanimate property. So we have a nice panel of looted arms and armour on the left from the British Museum, and another object from the British Museum, a captured barbarian with a very expressive face, awaiting his probably horrible fate. Interestingly, women too could end up enslaved. We have a domestic scene of a standard bearer's daughter, Imogen, of his daughter to be precise, being served by a female servant, presumably an enslaved servant. And one of the great characters of Roman Britain, good parallel to Trentianus' story of attempting to purchase a concubine, is from Hadrian's Wall, Arbea, Roman fort, is a tombstone of Regina, Queenie, if you like, and she is described as the freedwoman and wife of a Syrian soldier called Barates. So clearly Barates had purchased her as a concubine, but she received a freedom of sorts when he married her, so she became his freedwoman. But she didn't live long. She died at the age of 30, and there's an inscription in Aramaic below showing that Barates very much lamented the loss of his wife / property. Also from in the fort section, we can display a considerable presence of free women, and women of quite high status actually, in military communities. Principally is the Vindolanda tablets, where we have correspondences between the commander's wife, Sulpicia at Vindolanda, and Claudia Severa, where she describes her her little boy, her filiolus, invites Sulpicia to her birthday party, for example. We have a lovely tombstone, sadly missing its inscription, from again from Carlisle, showing a genteel lady with a filiolus. Gives you a good impression. And the birthday party letter is on the left, which has on the bottom right of the tablet a second hand that gives a kind of valedictory remark at the end, which we think must be the earliest female handwriting from Britain. We have a lot of gendered artifacts that we can also show from forts. A rather grisly find there of a hairpiece from a grave, the only surviving bit of a body with hairpins in it, but we get hairpins that do turn up in forts like Vindolanda, showing the presence of women. And behind that is a bit of military merchandise, if you like, barracks wear pottery in the form of Julia Domna, who stayed in York, and this is an object from Yorkshire Museum, so a kind of memento of her visit. Some of the Vindolanda tablets give us other impressions. For example, there is the strength report of the Tungrians, which has a list of where soldiers were deployed. Interestingly, some of them are outside the fort in the community, and this leads us into a very grim section of the exhibition, Enforcers of Occupation. We know from the Gospels that soldiers engaged in keeping the peace could be very brutal. Of course, the story of the crucifixion is a very good example, and we have in the exhibition the first find of a crucifixion from Britain, the Cambridgeshire crucifixion, displayed for the first time. Very grim. Also, as you can see in the middle there, is a diagram of some other bodies that accompany him. 2 soldiers from Canterbury with their swords tossed into a pit. Soldiers are face down. It looks like they've been killed by perhaps bandits. We know from some strength reports that soldiers could be listed as slain by bandits. And also in the Vindolanda tablets we have reports of a merchant being beaten by soldiers arbitrarily. Isolated resistance, of course, could become scaled up. Yes, here we are. So the revolt of Queen Boudica of the Iceni is the most famous Roman revolt in the most famous revolt in Roman Britain, and we have this amazing, what looks like a Roman helmet from Colchester, but is in fact a Victorian concoction made up of dozens and dozens of parts of helmets and armour from the destruction layer of the Boudican revolt, showing you the extent of the bloodshed. And less well known to a British audience, but actually a lot more successful and with lasting repercussions, is the revolt of Arminius from AD 9, which Arminius was a Roman cavalry commander of Germanic origin and part of an invading force of 3 legions sent across the Rhine to pacify yet more territory. But he was a turncoat, switched sides, joined up with the Free Germans, bushwhacked the invading force, and it resulted in the complete annihilation of 3 Roman legions and their support units. The battlefield was recently discovered in the 1990s at a place called Calcresa, and one of the most recent finds is this absolutely spectacular, full, almost complete, certainly the most complete segmental armour from a Roman legionary that must have died on the battlefield. The soil inside has been tested, and we know that somebody died inside it, so it's a very grim reminder. The bones don't survive. Next to it was found this shackle, which is a Roman shackle, but we do wonder, could it have been used on that legionary in his last moments? Very grim. But we didn't want to end on such a grim note, so the final section of the exhibition deals with retirement and the rising status of soldiers as we go through the period. But of course, retirement was the point where individually soldiers were elevated for different reasons. Trentianus and Appian had two different futures. Trentianus was a citizen soldier, an ex-legionary, and he would have received a premia or retirement bonus, 10 years worth of salary. And indeed, the letter of introduction that survives, describing him as a veteran, describes him as a veteran and a man of means, and he's seeking to make a property deal. So a comfortable end for a rather uncomfortable character. Appian wouldn't have received that, we don't think. Instead, they got enfranchisement. That, of course, might have entailed a working retirement. A very good case in point is this bronze document that we see at the bottom, a military diploma conferring citizenship on a retired Marine from the Bay of Naples, from Misenum, a chap called Marcus Cyrus, and he is from Jerash, we're told. Interestingly, it was found in the cubbyhole of a bedroom, so it was a treasured object. That bedroom was in a workshop dwelling, so clearly the owner had to work in his retirement. Unfortunately, Cyrus hadn't retired to Jerash. That workshop dwelling was in Pompeii, so bad place to retire. But it does mean that it survives for us to look at the end of the show. So I would like to end with a plea to everyone who can. Please do come and see the exhibition. It's got absolutely fantastic loan material. We've been ever so lucky. And also, I think it's a very fascinating underlying social story. A war machine is an engine of social change and development. You could say that Egyptians, Jordanians, we have even evidence of Britons joining up, but the path of a Roman auxiliary soldier might take him across a vast empire, to the shores of the Bay of Naples or to the chilly northern frontier. But only through completion of service could he truly count as a citizen of Rome. For the civilians they mingled with, it was very much a mixed picture. Soldiers were enthusiastic enslavers, cruel punishers who could tip over into exploitation in enforcing Rome's occupation. No wonder the Gospels compare occupied land to a man possessed by demons. When Jesus asks one such poor soul for the name of his supernatural tormentors, he answers, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And just to end on, I hope, a funny picture. It's getting very enthusiastic audiences. Thank you. So now I'll take some questions that I've been sent. So question 1, regarding ranks. If the centurion was the lowest rank, which was the highest? No, centurion was a high rank. So centurion was the highest rank that a commoner could aspire to. Below him would be standard bearers on double pay, an optio, again a man on double pay. So there's quite a gap between centurions and their assistants. There's also a pay and a half grade. But above centurions you had aristocratic commanders, tribunes and prefects, and of course, the head of a legion was a legate. So yes, centurion, the highest rank for a commoner. Question 2, you mentioned that the soldier Trentianus joined the auxiliary force first. Does this mean that Roman citizens could choose which armed service to join? Yes, indeed. Legions were citizen exclusive, but auxiliary regiments weren't. Now, the estimate is that perhaps 20% of the population were privileged Roman citizens. So there was always extra pressure in trying to find legionaries, but some people see that the proportion of auxiliary regiments to legions might have changed over time, with perhaps a greater proportion, instead of the 50-50 that Augustus imagined, a greater proportion of auxiliaries to legionaries. And like Trentianus, citizens clearly did join the auxiliary forces. For example, that example of the legionary that wanted to become a cavalryman. So yes, it was quite possible that they could join. Question 3. We understand that 50% of the legionaries survived, so a 50% mortality rate. What was the average mortality rate for the general Roman population at that time? How were the legionaries fed during their expeditions? Who provided the food? Well, lots of questions there. There's 2 estimates that I know of based on documentary evidence of soldiers erecting altars as they retired from legions. One estimate, Richard Duncan Jones, is 45 to 55% chance of surviving to retirement, and another author gives sort of 60-40. So we've just said 50-50. But as for what the average mortality rate over 25 years would be, I've got no idea at all, I have to say. How were the legionaries fed during their expeditions? Well, the Roman army could buy in food, of course. It also took in foodstuffs as tribute. We have a very interesting modius, or grain measure, found on Hadrian's Wall, which clearly fleeced the local population somewhat, because it has a certain amount that it says on the front of it that the modius measured, but in fact that's wrong, and it's taking in a lot more than the inscription suggests. So you could get it in direct tribute, you could purchase it, and interestingly, on Trajan's column we can see soldiers stealing food from the fields, cutting corn, and each soldier had, as part of his personal kit, a reaping scythe in order to do this. So rather grimly, they could deprive local people of their own food as they marched through their territory. Question 4. How much time would soldiers spend in actual battle? Were they rotated in and out of combat, as is the case today? Well, the campaigning season was between the equinoxes, and you'd be out on campaign beyond the frontier, if you like, in this period. But it seems to be that you could have months of marching before you could actually get to battle, so there would be a lot of rough living. But the whole of winter wouldn't be spent on campaign at all. You'd just be in the winter forts, the permanent forts, which are called hiberna. So they were winter quarters, if you like. So I guess that's a rotation of at least half the year not fighting. But training was continuous, I have to say. Question 5. On retirement, did legionaries receive a one-off cash grant or a pension? And did they all receive a grant of land? Well, in the Republic, pensioned off legionaries did receive land, but this was quickly commuted in the Empire to a cash payment instead. So, as I said, 10 years of pay in one go at the end of service. But we don't think, or at least there's no evidence, that non-citizen soldiers received that. Instead, they got enfranchisement, but only from at least the sort of middle of the 1st century AD. Question 6. What percentage of military service members reached an age to be able to draw the pension? Well, that's that estimate of about 50-50 as an estimate. It has to be said that probably death rates were as much due to disease, illness, as violence, and we know this from more recent pre-modern campaigns. For example, the Boer War, there was 60% attrition due to illness. So a good proportion would have been killed through natural causes. In fact, in the letters of Trentianus, he goes on at length more about getting food poisoning than being wounded during the Jewish diaspora revolt. Question 7. Are we any closer to finding the site of the Battle of Mons Graupius, and what happened to the legion that disappeared? Yes. So I don't know if they found the battle site of Mons Graupius. This was Agricola versus Calgacus, the Caledonian chieftain. It's somewhere in the Grampians, we think, but not to my knowledge that it's been discovered. But there's always a chance, just like the Battle of the Teutoburger Forest, which is Kalkriese. It could turn up. I think there's another battlefield in Germany that probably the time of the AD 230s that's turned up as well. So they can appear. What happened to the legion that disappeared? That's the 9th Legion. I take it, if you read your Rosemary Sutcliffe, you know about the disappearance of the 9th Legion. Well, there's mixed evidence on that. We know that Hadrian swaps out the 9th Legion at York and replaces it with the 6th Legion, which he takes from, I think, Nijmegen. What happens to the 9th Legion? Well, in the middle of the 2nd century, there are tile stamps that turn up, I think, in the Vienna area. But one argument is it's just a sort of rump of the 9th Legion, and it's been mauled at some point. There is evidence of trouble at the start of Hadrian's reign in Britain. Letters from his tutor of Marcus Aurelius' tutor Fronto talks about trouble at the beginning of Hadrian's reign in Britain. So one theory is that the legion might have been largely destroyed in that action. We just don't know, sadly. It's fun to speculate, though. Question 8. Would a soldier's posting in Britain be seen as undesirable due to the distance from Rome? Well, that's hard to tell. It might depend. If you were in Vindolanda, the two main regimental groups were the Batavians, sort of Dutch folk, if you like, and the Tongrians from the area of Tongres, which is in Belgium. So these would have been areas which would be quite Northern European themselves. One thing we do know is that once a regiment is moved somewhere, it tends to recruit locally. So we have a tombstone of a Brigantian in the exhibition who is from the north of England, the Brigantes, but he is in a Thracian regiment stationed on the Antonine Wall. So he didn't have to come very far at all. All right. And then I've got the next message that we are ending. That's all the questions that I am allowed. So thank you very much for all the questions and your attention. And I do hope you're able to visit the exhibition soon. If not, we have another online event on the subject of Vindolanda on the 7th of March. Do look out for that. Details are on the BM website now. Thank you for joining us today, and it's goodbye from the BM and goodbye from London. Goodbye.